Welcome to Dr. Food's weekly food business insights, number 52. It's August and it's holiday time in the Northern Hemisphere. Miguel's visiting family in Spain and I'm just about to go down to the southwest of England to help my son, who with his wife runs 2 restaurants and a food truck in Devon, right bang on the seaside. It's lovely, but the business is frenetic at the moment. 3 forces have come together to put huge pressure on the restaurant sector in the UK and in other countries too, I would suggest. First of all, 1, very strong demand for consumers for eating out. I mean, after all, they've been cooped up at home for months and are desperate to have a taste of restaurant food. Number 2, that's brilliant for the food service sector, but we're still in a COVID world and staffing is a nightmare just now. A third of my son's staff are self-isolating because of apparent contact with a person who has contracted COVID-19. Point 3, compounding this problem is the aftermath of Brexit. Remember, in the UK, back in January 2020, we exited the European Union. And thousands of the Europeans working in the UK, many who were the backbone of the restaurant industry, decided to go home to Eastern Europe. Will the UK food service sector return to normal in a post-pandemic world? I don't think so. Restaurant workers, like others in the UK, had months of being paid by the government to stay at home. They were furloughed in the parlance of the day, and they're showing distinct reluctance to return to work life that entails very long hours, relatively low pay, and difficult working conditions, for example, steamy hot kitchens. Restaurant owners are looking to mitigate the impact of being short-staffed by simplifying menus to reduce labour preparation and doing what they can to automate simple culinary processes. This may very well stick in the post-COVID era, I would think. Anyway, enough of my family's restaurant problems. There's no nuggets this week, but I thought you'd be interested in a recent survey we've found on European consumers' views on trust in the European food industry. So here goes. First, do European consumers trust the food industry? Well, it depends on what sector of the industry you're talking about and the size of the business concerned. Every year, the European Union financed Institute of Innovation and Technology, long words, produces its Food Trust Report, and it surveys a very hefty sample of 20,000 consumers in 18 European countries. Encouragingly, actually, during the course of the pandemic in 2020, consumer trust in the food industry increased, and with it, the confidence they have in food products. So, bravo! Helpfully, the survey started by benchmarking trust across the 18 countries, asking the more general question, do you trust other people? About half the sample said yes, and a quarter said no, but this varied by country. Danes, people from Denmark, trusted each other the most, followed by Spaniards, the Dutch, and the British, whereas people from the Czech Republic, Italy, and Turkey were much more wary of their fellow humans. Of all players within the food industry, farmers are most trusted by the public. 67% of European consumers saying they trusted farmers, with only 13% saying they didn't. Retailers are the next most trusted group, 53% being positive, whereas 20% were negative. The positives were up 7% from the survey in 2018, most likely reflecting the good job retailers have been perceived to be doing keeping the supermarket shelves well stocked during the COVID crisis. Trust in food manufacturers and government agencies lagged behind, however, with less than half of consumers trusting these two groups and close to 30% actively distrusting them. Overall, UK consumers are much more likely to consider the food industry played a more caring role, I should say, than other European countries do. The most negative comments from all countries revolved around the food industry not listening, such as not listening to public concerns or not listening to ordinary people, and not providing information consumers need about products, and not being open about what they're doing. However, all sectors were more trusted than in previous surveys. Again, I think a COVID boost. Drilling down into the detail through qualitative comments, it's revealing, although perhaps not surprising. There's a very high level of trust in small-scale farmers, reflecting an idealistic, almost bucolic view of the business of farming. The small guys are seen as custodians of the land, passionate, hard-working, albeit underpaid and underdogs. There's much less trust in perceived industrial, intensive farms with fingers pointed at overuse of chemicals, poor animal welfare, and unlawful genetic modification practices. It's the same direction for retailers. The little local businesses are much trusted, whereas supermarkets are seen as being impersonal and sterile, although even the larger guys are seen to be improving their performance on sustainability. There's little empathy for manufacturers. On the plus side, they're seen as efficient, safe, and the iconic brands are trusted. But on the negative side, big food is seen as being exploitative, ruthless, profit-driven, although what's wrong with that, and blamed for using artificial additives. Government agencies are not much loved. They're seen as ponderous, not proactive, competent, but could regulate more efficiently, and prone to be over-influenced by special interest groups. The survey took a look at consumer confidence in the integrity of food products using measures of consumer perceptions on taste, healthiness, safety, authenticity, and sustainability. There was a big difference between countries. UK consumers scored their food industry highly on these criteria, and there was less but still strong support for the food industry overall by Finnish, people from Finland, Irish, Danish, and Dutch consumers, whereas those consumers from the Czech Republic, Turkey, Romania, and Greece were much more equivocal in their support for their own food industry. Finally, in the survey, a consumer panel was asked from their perspective, what was trust in food about? Their conclusion? It's about transparency from farm to fork, shorter value chains, closer relationships in the value chains, more focus on natural and local foods, better labelling on food products, and challengingly, for larger food industry players who, after all, produce most of our food, the panel was more comfortable with smaller businesses. Would these European consumer views on trust in the food industry be significantly different than, say, American, Canadian, Australian, New Zealand consumer views? I bet they're not way out of whack. In all these countries I've mentioned, farmers are at the top of the trust tree. Government regulators take a good bashing worldwide, whether they deserve it or not, with the possible exception of Singapore, where they're quite light. Like in the UK, US big retailers probably score reasonably well on trust. After all, America has had supermarkets for, 100 years or so, ever since, Piggly Wiggly opened in Memphis, Tennessee. And small independent retail stores have a much, much smaller footprint than they still do in many European countries, and in Australia and New Zealand too. The latter two countries, I mean Australia, back to Australia and New Zealand, each have a grocery retail scene dominated by two major players. In fact, in New Zealand right now, the two majors are being investigated for anti-competitive behaviour, leading to higher food prices for Kiwi consumers, or so it's claimed. There tends to be a shortage of trust whenever two major players dominate any retail scene, and Australia and New Zealand are just good examples. But what about big food, including big food service, you know, the McDonald's of this world? The fact of the matter is that maybe when you're top of the heap, taking the brickbats is just part and parcel of the job of being number one. And a reminder that the job requires you to have big ears to listen and a thick skin. It's worrisome, particularly in mainland Europe, that a majority of consumers and many politicians believe that a 21st century food industry is best served by small-scale, often under-resourced farmers and food processors. I mean, clearly SMEs, small and medium enterprises, have a vitally important role in the global food industry. But as we add another 2 billion people to our world over the next 30 years or so, it'll be more than handy to have some big players down on the farm and along the food chain producing tasty, safe, healthy, nutritious and environmentally friendly food at affordable prices, as long as they keep their big ears open to listen and pointed in the direction of their customers. That's me done. Look forward to talking to you next week, and I hope you have a great weekend. Bye now.